I want to start off by asking you a question that is really, really, really dumb. But because it's really dumb, I feel like no one's maybe asked you this before. But it's been a year on since you released Jake to the public. Do you like your own film?
I think you need a year to like your own film. It's when you get done with any creative thing, if you have, I mean, there's that great Ira Glass piece that floated around that he did on NPR where he talked about the distinction between your taste and your abilities, and that creative people get into something and they know what they like and they know the things they love, and they have this killer taste, but their abilities haven't developed yet. And filmmaking is one of the most complicated arts there is, and there's so many moving parts to it. And so, you know, when you first get done with something, it's very hard to see anything but the things that you got wrong. And so to have the time to sit back from it, yeah, I'd say now I love it more than I did, because I can kind of take those things that maybe didn't work as well and say, well, you know, they're part of this thing, but it's this really weird, atypical film that wouldn't have got made any other way, and I'm really proud of the things that make it unique, even if it is maybe a redheaded stepchild compared to the rest of things. Is that going to be an offensive thing to say, redheaded stepchild, or is that a common
I felt a
turn of
bit
phrase?
guilty for just doing like a little snort into the microphone.
Yeah.
Given you've had a year to dwell on it, is there anything you would have done differently with your distribution tactics?
Yeah, I think the main thing would be just being aware of how much work it is. What we did is we came out 2 weeks after What We Do in the Shadows, and we put that thing months in advance. And I think actually our producer, Alistair Ty Sampson, was like, I think that's going to be big. I'm like, oh, you know, it'll be fine, but it won't be that big of a deal. And then I was living in Wellington, and by the time they changed the sign and had a blood red carpet outside of the embassy, I'm like, oh, it's big.
You should have just tagged Jake onto it.
Well, we did, and thanks to the folks at Phantom, we had a big poster thing, and we had a lot of pickup from, I mean, not just Flicks, but a lot of other press coming to the party, which was great. But we premiered in Auckland, and then we premiered in Wellington, I think a week or two later. And if we premiered in Auckland and Wellington at the same time with a plan to immediately be in a couple other regional cinemas, we could have taken more advantage of that national press. I know we couldn't get a review on Radio NZ because we weren't in two centers simultaneously, and because it's a national outlet, we couldn't do that. And that's something we didn't know. We just thought, because we're a small group of people, you know, Alistair and Anushka and I, the producers of the film, just doing this off our own backs, it's like, well, let's do what's achievable. So if I transport back, you know, last year at this time I was doing the creative writing course at Victoria University. I was very busy. Everyone else was working jobs as well. We did as well as we could with what we knew in the time, but yeah, I think that knowing those things, and also seeing some of the thing that really made me jealous of What We Do in the Shadows is I knew we didn't have the money to change the Wellington sign, but when they had a beer, I was just like, man, I bet we could have had a beer, and that would have been easy, and that would have been fun, and that would have been something I would have been proud of. You know, and that's, I think, the key for any of these small movies that want to get out there, is that you have very limited resources, so you have to find as many different creative ways as possible to reach audiences.
You guys actually created your own beer in the film. I mean, it only goes for a brief flash.
We created two, Triple Brown and Doug Weiser, which is part of a standard thing that you tend to do in movies, because alcohol companies get upset if you depict their product and then show people acting under the influence in less than respectable ways. We spent a year from the test screening to our release, and so much of that was deciding who is our core audience, how are we going to reach them, what publications are we going to go to, what are we not going to worry about, you know, are we going to do TV ads, are we going to shoot behind the scenes stuff for EPK stuff that we'll send out, and you know, at the end it was like, well, you know, our audience is most likely, you know, film geeks and sci-fi fans, and we're going to try to reach those people as much as possible and build awareness from there, and maybe it will build out. Because we had this diluted kind of opening, we had this sort of really nice window in Auckland and just at the start of Wellington, where being a self-funded film was this big deal that we could spin stories out of. by the time we opened Wellington, the film festival had just released all of it, and there were 14 other New Zealand films competing for that. And by the time we went to the regional theaters, it was early August, and some of those films, most particularly The Dark Horse, were hitting those. And it's really impossible to overstate how much oxygen The Dark Horse and Guardians of the Galaxy as well sucked out of every other film at the box office.
That's kind of just like the state of distributing any sort of independent film nowadays into cinemas.
Not just independent. I mean, you look at films like Crimson Peak and Black Mass and these kind of prestige dramas with lots of name actors and often named directors, Sicario, and Steve Jobs in the States, the Danny Boyle film, which has Michael Fassbender and Kate Winslet and Seth Rogen, and it just died on the vine. And it's like you've got an A-list director who's done blockbusters. You've got 3 actors that most people know the name of, and it's not cutting through. And
then you get films like Beast of No Nation, which opened simultaneously in cinemas and on Netflix, and that's already had more viewers than those other films made money.
Well, that's a really interesting thing too. Is like there's a real question of if you're going to sit down in 2015 and make moving image art or moving image storytelling, why are you choosing the feature film format, and why do you care about being in a cinema? And I think with something like Sicario was a film I really loved and thought was a cinematic experience, but it just didn't connect with an audience. And I think a lot of that was because we've all seen 5 seasons of Breaking Bad. Is this going to be better enough of Breaking Bad that it justifies getting off my couch and going to the cinema, especially when there'll be 6 other movies opening next week that I might want to see. We're buying tickets for Spectre and Star Wars in advance. We've got
and
Beast
The Martian was also playing, and that was a mega hit.
Yeah, and The Martian's done quite well, but it's been at the expense, I think, of a lot of these other films that normally there wouldn't be that kind of adult-leaning but wide audience appealing entertainment that probably sucked out the oxygen of quite a few of those films.
Okay, to talk about your film.
Talk about Jake more.
That was great. We could talk about it for hours, but not right now. But I want to get 3 numbers off you right now.
Okay.
How long did it take to write Jake?
It took 18 months, which includes an aborted first draft, a second draft that was cut short when my laptop got stolen, and then from the time I restarted that third draft, where I was basically rewriting the first 23 pages from memory, to a end of a first draft, was about 4 months, and that would have been, I think, January 2009.
How long did it take to film?
In terms of shoot days? Or in terms
shoot days.
Okay, 25 shoot days, although I think a couple of those were like, we're going to go do one scene at a tattoo parlor for an hour, or we're going to go get a sunset. So I'd say probably 20 really full shooting days and bits and bobs, and then there were a couple, there was one day of pickups that were just exteriors where we went around with a DSLR and shot.
How long did it take to edit in post-production?
Around 3 years, but there were lots of, that was obviously not 3 years of sitting there. What happened is we did the first edit quite quickly, and we realized, and that was a 104-minute cut of the film, and we realized, even as it was going out a couple months into it, actually we have rushed this, I mean, I'm an editor for a living. I had Peter Evans, who's an amazing editor, cutting it. My producer Alistair works in post, so, we kind of felt like, oh yeah, we know how to do this, but what you don't really know when you start editing is, there's this first phase of, I've taken the stuff that I've shot and I've made a film that reflects the script, and I've cut the obviously extraneous stuff, so I guess that's the film. And it's like, no, you're just starting then. That's where you start from, and then it's like, actually, what sustains, what works, what doesn't, what seemed necessary in the writing that you just kind of have on autopilot because you've heard the lines so many times.
What was your budget being a self-funded film?
The budget, in terms of the number that you say, okay, here's the number that we're going to make this film for, and you write down at the start of the process, was $10,000. Everybody worked for free. All the actors, all the crew. That's huge. Our DOP worked at Panavision, and we had so much gear. I mean, I say it's a six-figure film with seven figures worth of favors. And I don't want to sound like a walking advertisement, but it is genuine that like I look at what we did for the budget we did, and watching behind the scenes footage and seeing what we had there as gear, it's like there's a reason that it looks at least semi-professional, and that's because we had that support.
Great. Thank you so much, Doug.
You're welcome.
I wish you all the best for your future on-demand success and for your premiere on Zone.
Yeah, that'll be November 21st, 9:30 p.m. on Zone, and we'll be premiering shortly after that on VOD at jakethemovie.com. So anyone who wants to download the movie legitimately from the privacy of their own home and watch it there, if they miss the Zone screening, can do it then.
Great.